This FedGov Today program sponsored by Commvault and Carahsoft. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, don't use AI to solve just any old problem. You too can leverage the data resilience advantage and solving the quantum equation for the federal government. Welcome to FedGov Today in Washington, D.C., on YouTube and around the world on the American Forces Network. I'm Francis Rose. The federal government's new artificial intelligence use case inventories due any day now. Last year's inventory included more than 1,700 examples. One federal chief information officer's warning, though, don't use AI to solve every problem. That CIO is Carter Farmer. He's CIO at the Environmental Protection Agency. Carter, welcome. Thanks for joining me. You said recently they just jump in there without asking the right questions first. Many times the solution or the problem you're trying to solve doesn't need AI. What are the right questions to ask about AI, and how are you doing that at your agency? How are you vetting what's an AI solution and what doesn't need to be?
Well, I think you got to step back a step from there and say, how are we actually solving problems? You know, when you go to solve an actual puzzle, you don't look, you don't have a box to look at the picture. You don't just go in there and say, I think the puzzle is this, therefore I'm going to build it this way, right? You have to figure out there's patterns, match the colors, and put those pieces together. So really it's just taking a step back and figuring out, what are we trying to solve? What are the data involved? How does this process work? And imagine that and go through that process to see what tools you need. AI is just a tool in the tool belt. You wouldn't fix a pipe leak with a hammer, right? You would use a pipe wrench. Right, so you don't. If you find the right tool to solve the problem, then it's going to work 100% every time. So it's really about going through that process to figure out, how do I approach this problem? What are the end results I need to solve for, and what's the data involved, and how do I incorporate the best tool possible to make this a reality?
And it sounds to me, I'm just guessing, but of those three elements that you just laid out, what's the end result that I'm trying to get to? Maybe the most important one. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think a lot of times we'll know what the end result we want is in mind, and we'll use it, try to match it to a technology. Mm-hmm. And that's really the opposite way of how you solve a problem. Like, you don't go to a math problem and say, here's the answer, I want to work backwards to figure out how I got to it, right? So
yeah. How are you trying to incorporate that line of thinking into what you're doing consolidation-wise at EPA?
So number one, our team is really approaching all IT projects from a data-first mentality. So they're looking at the data, seeing how it interacts. We have numerous systems that interact with each other. And those systems can work from the Office of Air and Radiation to Office of Water, Office of Land Management, things of that nature. And they all come together and have to work together. So looking at the data and seeing how they actually come together, how they coalesce, and how we actually make all those things actually come to a point where they actually work together, instead of saying, I'm going to make this disparate system, this bespoke product that doesn't work with these things over here, and then we have to figure out how to fix that on the back end, right? Mm-hmm. Another part is, we've always been kind of a not just EPA issue, but a government-wide issue. It's always been kind of decentralized from an IT standpoint. And that really goes back to how the government's funded, how funding comes into agencies, things of that nature. Obviously, agencies were around before IT. So trying to actually centralize some of those services and find efficiencies, actually have everybody paddling in the same direction when it comes to solving a problem, I think is very important as well.
How does the data-first mentality inform the way that you're restructuring either where the boxes are inside the organization from an IT perspective, or how one organization talks to another, or the infrastructure that's required to support that, and so on?
So right now we are focusing on really walking hand in hand with the different offices who are building, modernizing their systems or building new systems, and making sure we have a centralized approach on how we're actually approaching the certain data elements and how they might interact with other systems across the agency, and pulling those stakeholders in to make sure they're involved in the process as well. And we're thinking 10 steps down the road, not just immediately what's in front of us. So that's step number one. I think moving forward, we will slowly actually have to pull those pieces together from a more centralized organizational standpoint. But it's really a process, and it takes time, and changing things overnight actually would create more chaos than it would actually fix problems. So we're really trying to do this in a thoughtful way that actually brings real value to not only the EPA and our mission, but the taxpayer as well.
You used the puzzle analogy earlier, which I think is fascinating as an organization is trying to rethink its infrastructure and the way that it delivers IT services to its internal stakeholders, your colleagues in the agency, and then to the external stakeholders too. That's particularly complex, I imagine, for EPA because you interact with so many nonprofits, so many organizations in academia and the national labs and so on.
Yes, and it's we are. If you look at EPA and our mission, we are very much a data-driven organization. We are collecting data across the board from numerous different inputs, and we're then looking at that data, taking action on that data, and reporting out on that data. So at the end of the day, we are data collectors and data aggregators and data people that are actually monitoring the data to see what we need to do with it. So our focus is really 100% on how do we pull that in a thoughtful way? How does it work together? How do we design systems that actually integrate that? And really, AI runs on a data layer, right? So if your data isn't good, then AI is only as good as how the data actually is underneath it. So working really hard to make sure that our data is sanitized, it's actually unified in a way that actually makes sense from different parts of the organization. So you might have a definition for something in Office of Land and Emergency Management from Office of Water, two same data points, but call something completely different. So trying to actually coalesce those things so that AI can understand our data and actually put that AI layer on top of it to provide those huge efficiencies and things of that nature.
Do you have an end state in mind, or is that kind of an obsolete term in information technology now, given the way that new technologies come about, the way that existing technologies evolve and so on?
I think I would get way too far out ahead of my skis if I was trying to think of the end state while in the middle of, it's like trying to change the engine on a plane while it's still in the air, right? You know, that always is a moving target. And I think what we try to do is optimize with the tools we have in our tool belt right now, and then look down the road and see what's on the horizon. How can we incorporate that? How can we make sure we're building things that are ready for those new technologies that are coming, like agentic AI and things of that nature? We're moving in that direction right now. So it's really about doing all the groundwork to prepare ourselves so we aren't stuck in one specific direction and have to backtrack and then move back and redesign again.
Do you have mileposts then that are in mind where you say in 6 months we want to be here, a year we want to be here, or things like that? Or are you just kind of grinding through the process of improving things on a day-to-day, month-to-month basis?
It really depends on the problem we're talking about, right? There's certain things we're working on at EPA that we definitely have strict timelines around, and that I think we're working very diligently towards, and in meeting very short timetables that might have been 4 or 5 years before, we're doing in a year now.
Yeah.
So there's things like that, big modernization projects. There's other things where we're not time boxing it, right? We're saying, okay, let's look for significant improvement. How much are we raising the bar? How much are we actually changing and improving the process? Which is sometimes a better indicator if you're going the right direction than actually hitting what we call a finished product.
What are some of the big building blocks that you want to hit that you mentioned a moment ago?
So one of those is definitely the centralization piece, right? We want to fix that. The other is we've actually in our reorganization have really changed how we view IT. You know, it used to be in the office of the OCIO, everything was basically kind of a waterfall kind of mentality of your security, your operations, your data team, and they'll do their part and throw over the fence to the other team. Now we're working in a more modern way where we actually have what we're calling fusion teams, or we might call it an agile tiger team, where the teams are actually all coming together at once from cradle to grave and working through projects, whether it's a short-term project, long-term project, to actually bring everybody to the table day one so we can have all that information up front, built up in a very efficient way so we aren't getting 6 months down the road and saying, oh no, we forgot this piece. Oh no, we didn't think about that. We want to have all those discussions at the very beginning of the project, and those people will live with that product until it's all the way to the decom.
Carter, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
You can read more about Carter's work at EPA on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com.